go take a biplane ride?
We're passing on our love of the sky and flying. Really, that's what we're doing.
My name's Joseph Costa, and I've been flying for 59 years. This is my first solo license that I received in 1951. I started in 1950. And this is my license for person on the boat. I flew a tri-motor down in Florida in the right seat. A certificate from that. These are awards I got.
Joe, when did you fly that tri-motor?
That was down in, I think it was around 68 in Florida, Sun and Fun. We always went down. I've gone down there for almost maybe 20 years, flying different airplanes down and so forth. And my discharge from the United States Air Force. I was a jet engine specialist in the service. This is my Wright Brothers Master Pilot Award for flying for 15 years. And this is Karen Collins, and that's the plane I first learned how to fly in 1950. I'd say 69 in Sun and Fun, Florida. We flew down, and I used to fly my airplane down there. I've gone down quite a few years with different types of airplanes, flown with different people.
How long did it take you to get down there and what was it that you flew?
I flew my Cessna 150, is airplane that I owned, 3586 Juliet. And we went down three buddies, two of my buddies from Nantucket. One had a Super Cub, and the other one had a home built. And we'd go down in formation, land at different airports in formation, take off, and we've been doing that, flying together for a good many years. Now I've flown this J3 Cub down to Florida, and that was Carolyn Collins. She was my instructor, and she let me take it. Now these airplanes don't have, well, they have a compass, but they don't work well, and I didn't have any radios. All I had was maps. And I flew a home-built Cubby, which had an 0200. This has a 65 horsepower engine in it. And the Cubby, it was a home-built, it was built on the island here, and it only had 12 hours on it, so I had to fly off the hours till I got 50 hours and had it signed off by the FAA before I could take it to Florida. He first wanted me to fly it to Ohio in his racetrack. He had a racetrack out there, but then he bought a horse farm down in Florida, so I flew it down there. And I landed in the racetrack, inside the racetrack, and parked in front of his house. But the only problem was, he parked it, the prop rotted off it, never flew it, and then some guy called me up and said, you know, I want my prop back. I said, what prop? He says, well, it's on, it's airplane. I said, I didn't put the prop on there. I didn't buy the prop. He would get him, you know, go see him and get the prop from him. Anyways, but we made several flights down in Florida, and as I say, we used to go down with a 180 tail dragger. We went down in a Cherokee 6. Those were in probably middle 70s, 60s. I mean, I made 14 flights with my airplane, going back and forth. And that's a little Cessna, a two-seater. And I used to carry the equipment because the home built didn't have any place to put anything in it. He had a 1 gallon can that anytime we landed at an airport or something like that, if we couldn't get to a gas station or something like that to get the gas, we'd have to walk 1 gallon at a time back and forth to fill the airplane up. But that was his airplane, and we'd land every place. I mean, when we used to fly the Super Cub with Bruce Holgate down in Nantucket, we could take off from here, and we may not even go over 400 feet. We'd go by people's backyards and wave at them, and the whole side of the airplane would be open. This is just some of the awards I got.
Joe, please go through each of the awards.
Well, this one here is the Wright Brothers Master Pilot Award, which is the award you get for flying over 50 years without either having any accidents or you kill anybody, I guess. And then, of course, you don't tell them about the incidents. The little things, you run into a hangar with a wing or something like that and you fix it yourself. We don't bother talking about that. Now this, I told you about Carolyn Cullen. That's her airplane there, and I used to fly that. I flew that. I had about 550 hours in that airplane. That's my honorable discharge from the Air Force. Governor Weld got me this, sent it down. This is a Bonanza that we flew down to Arizona. A friend of mine has that Bonanza, and he's going back to Arizona for the winter time, so he asked me to fly down with him because his wife had a bad shoulder and had an operation, so she went by airline. So I went down with him, and it took about 3 days. You know, we stopped in hotels and ate and so forth. Appreciation for Korea when I was in the service during this Korean conflict. But these are awards from the government, politicians and stuff like that. My son-in-law was a senator, and those are just awards from those people there. So anyway, that's what we got. Let's go down cellar and I'll show you some more. Oh yes, there's an award here in the kitchen. It's not an award really, it's just a picture that a friend of mine drew because I took him for a ride in a J3 Cub. And I had been going to Nantucket in my 150 and I blew a rock around. So I made an emergency landing back at the field and I got the J3 Cub because I was going to Nantucket because a friend of mine was flying a DC-3 for the last flight out of Nantucket to Boston, and he invited me along, so I was going to go with him. But where I blew the engine, I took the Cub, I was about an hour late and he had left. So I was on my way back home, and I was about 2,000 feet, you know, flying safely, you get altitude safely. And I saw this donut in the water, a white donut. I said, I wonder what that is, you know, and I looked down and I saw a boat and I was going around and around and around. I said, well, maybe it's some kids playing or something like that. So I went a little further and like the hairs of the back of my neck stood up. And I couldn't figure out, there's something strange. So I took a closer look and I went down and I saw that there was nobody in the boat. They had been thrown out. And what I did was I took and I came down about 400 feet and I looked. I said, what am I going to do? I got no radio. I can't call anybody for safety. So I went over towards the fishing boat and I went by him and he's cleaning fish on the engine housing. Of course, the engine's running, so he didn't hear me. So I turned around, come back lower, and went right back over the boat. And he didn't see me again, so I made one more turn back, and I headed right for him. I was about 10 feet off the water. And I headed right for him, and he finally looked up, and then I pulled up, and I pointed to where I want to go. I mean, it was so close he could see me. I went back, and I made the emergency circle to show that there was something wrong here, and that I wanted him to come to that point. So he came over, and he picked up two of the guys and left two in the water. And I couldn't understand that, but I understand that when the boat, they went out of the boat, the circle will go one way and circle because the engine gets thrown over, and it was a powerful engine. It ran over one of the guys. It cut his legs badly. He almost cut one off completely, and the other one was shattered. So that's why they had him in the water. And I getting close to going home, so because I'm getting low on gas, so I took off, and then I saw this big white ship going by, and I looked, it's a Coast Guard. So I went right by the bow, I turned around, come back, and of course I had the side of the planes open, and I just went right, I must have been about 10 feet from the bow, and I went like this, and they went over, and I decided I better get back to the airport because I'm getting low on gas. So they picked these guys up. There's two brothers and two other guys. Years later, I met one of the brothers. I went to dinner with my daughter, and I met him, and his mother said, would you come with me, please? I want to show you something. So I went into a bedroom, and she said, see these two children here? Because you saved my son, they wouldn't be here. So she was really appreciated that I did something to help.
got you interested in flying?
I was 7 years old, and I saw some airplanes fly over the vineyard, and I just thought that was beautiful to see this big bird in the sky flying by. So there was an old hobby shop over in Oak Bluffs at a gas station, so I went over and I bought a kit that was stick built, very light, rubber band, you wind it up, and I would take that, and it was so light I could go on one side of my living room, let the prop go, and it'd go across the living room. The prop would just be turning slow, and I'd go over the other side of the living room by the piano, and I'd catch it over there. And that was my first model. Then I found out about gas models and stuff like that, and U-control. So I bought, my first engine was a Mohawk, and it was ignition. And I was running it outside, breaking it in, and I reached over to advance the spark, and I touched the plug, and I learned not to do that again, because boy, that was shocking, I'll tell you.
How old were you then?
I was about 12. I was about 12 years old then.
Back when you were 12, living
Yeah.
here on Martha's Vineyard.
Yeah.
Tell me what your memories of airplanes, the airports. Tell me about the different airports that were on the island. and how
Okay,
much you
well,
loved
and of course in the 1940s they built the base up there, and the trucks used to go by the house, and drivers would stop and pick us up as kids and take us all the way up, drop us off outside the gate, go in and pick us up back up again, and then come back down home. And of course, when they started to bring the planes in, I used to sit outside the gate and watch them at the end of the runway, and watch them land and take off, and I just loved watching airplanes. So we had my mother rented rooms, and there was a couple of lieutenants with flyers that stayed at the house. To sit outside the gate and watch the airplanes, and I'd take a lunch on Saturdays and Sundays, and I'd sit outside there and have my lunch and just watch airplanes all day long. And then I was at home one day, and I heard this airplane going back and forth, and I was wondering what was going on, and it was an old Sturman spraying for mosquitoes. So I climbed up on the top of my roof, and I was watching him fly back and forth, and every time he come close to the house I would wave at him. And then one time he come over straight over the house there, and boy, there was no bugs flying around my face, I'll tell you, when he went by, because I got sprayed good.
Let's talk about the airports. We had Katama.
Yeah.
We had
Okay.
Trade Winds.
Right.
We had the
Well, Trade
big
Winds
airport. And then, were you around with No Man still in operation?
Oh yeah, well the person that lived in my mother's house, she used to rent a house up in back, and it was Mr. Tilton. And Mr. Tilton was originally lived on No Man's, and they had a sheep farm. And they used to have a school there years ago. They had a school at No Man's, and they used to go back and forth on the rowboat to school. The children from Chilmark and Gayhead. And when he retired from there, he came down and lived in the house, and until he moved, I think he moved years ago to somewhere, I don't know where he went. So, and then Mr. Clark, who was a purser on the vessels, rented the house. Dick Clark and his brother grew up there. All this time I've been interested in airplanes, so when I started working on the boat, I had some money. I went over and talked to Carolyn, and I asked her if I could learn how to fly. And she says, yeah, anybody can learn how to fly if they want to. I said, yeah, but I got a problem. I don't have very much money. She says, well, you can work around here for your time if you'd like to do that. I says, yeah.
Where's this?
At Trade Winds.
Okay.
So I used to paint the hangar roof, all the diamonds up there. I used to replace the wind socks, which there hasn't been one up for quite a while lately, and it should be up because that's a safety factor, and it's got to be done. So I did talk to the land bank, and they said they were going to look into it. So we'll see if it gets up there. Of course, when I had my airplane there, and I used to take care of the field for the land bank, I did all the work around there. Some years I would spend about $1,500 of my own money, because I didn't want to bother the land bank about money to buy fence rails or fix the doors on the hangars and put the windsocks up. And I used to make the windsocks. I'd sew them up myself.
Well,
Sewing
hold on.
machine.
Let's go back to when you were first learning to fly.
Okay, that was, oh yeah, very interesting. I sold it in 7 hours and 10 minutes in the J3 Cub. But on my solo flight, I was taking off towards the golf course, and of course we went up 400 feet and made our first turn, and went to about 600 feet and then made a downwind turn. And as I was making my turn, an airplane come right by the front end of my airplane. Now this is my first flight alone, and it was Steve General from Megatown. He was going to New Bedford or something like that, and I was pretty upset about that. So when I went to land, I did my base and final, and I bounced coming in to land, and I said, whoa, wait a minute. I gave it throttle, went around. I went up about 3,000 feet, and I sat there, and I said to myself, well, here we are. I'm in an airplane. I got to land it. I just got shook up, so I got to calm down. So I just calmed myself down and went back into the pattern like I was supposed to, and landed the airplane and made a good landing. And Carolyn was really upset. She called him up, and boy, oh boy, she blessed her. Which was, ridiculous for him to do something like that right through an airport.
Tell me, what was the model airplane that you learned on?
J3 Cub. It was a 1946, bought directly from the factory. Carolyn went and got it and flew it all the way home from Pennsylvania, from the factory. And it was a one-owner airplane. Now, I could have bought that airplane a few years back, but I didn't have the money. I had a backup, but I didn't think too much of that because somebody else would be going in and out of that Trade Winds Airport, and that wouldn't be right. So.
Back then, when she was running the airport, how many airplanes called Trade Winds home?
There was Miss Love, who was in the Air Force, and what she did was she was instrumental in starting the women's auxiliary. Mrs. Love, she was the head of it, and they had a V-tail Bonanza. It was red and silver, and of course Carolyn had the J3 Cub and a Super Cub, not a Super Cub. Let me see, it was a PA-12 Piper Cruiser, and that was a three-place airplane. You could put two people in the back and one pilot sat up front. That was the advance of my flying in the airplane, because I went to that, and that had a radio in it. And didn't have any VORs or anything like that at that time, just a radio. And what you do is you turn the crystal, and then you'd have to transmit, and then you'd have to tune it to listen to the person talking back, because it wasn't crystal controlled receive. It was just a receiver, period. But that was advanced training we had, and that was a tough airplane to fly because no flaps. So you'd have to use the side of the airplane, and you'd slip it down on the angle to slow you down, to get down on the ground, and you'd level off, and she'd float, she'd float, she'd float.
What year did you get your license?
Well, I got it in 51, but I started flying in 50. Now, they had, in the 50s, the latest 50s and 60s, they had a lot of fish spotters flying in there. There was about 3 Citavias back on the field and a Super Cub that they used to fly out of there. Butchie Downs was one of the pilots, and he was a good pilot. Butchie was a good, very good pilot. He's not flying anymore today, but he works at the airport. And years ago, they used to take, and when they stacked airplanes in a hangar, they had a roller that the nose of the Cub would go down and the tail would be up in the air, and they'd roll them back to the backside of the hangar. And they could probably put 8 or 10 airplanes in the hangar that way. But that's years ago. And then, of course, a lot of people rented the hangar. We had a Tiger Moth that used to come in there, and they used to fly papers in with a Bamboo Bomber, which was a Piper, twin-engine airplane. And they just land and drop the papers off and then take off again. And there was a lot of activity back in them days. Back in the days when I first started flying, you could stand at the hangar and look down the end of 6 and look down the end of 2-4 and see the airplanes. But when it started taking off on 6 towards the east, they'd go behind like a little hill, and you wouldn't see them, and then you'd see them take off on the other side. And of course you had 3-3, which was a 3-1 and 1-5. But you'd have to come over to a golf course, the fence, to land on 1-5. I mean 3-3, 3-1. Sorry, 3-1. And you had to land at a certain spot, or else if you landed the other way, there was a hill. And there was quite a few accidents on a little hill because they'd try and float. The plane would float, and then it'd hit the hill and bounce way up in the air.
And that's why that runway is
It's
closed.
closed. No, not necessarily closed now, because it's because of the houses on the other end. They didn't want to be taken up over those houses and stuff like that. It's tough enough taking off on 2-4 and then turning to the right. Some people complain there too. They still complain.
Father Nagel said that unless it's really critical, you
Yeah.
want to stay off of 3-1.
Yeah, don't want to land there. When I was working for the land book, I took care of that. I took care of that for about 12, 14 years. And I did all the mowing. And I had no mower. I used to have to fix it all the time. And they'd bust gears and stuff, and I'd have to repair it. And the mower was not the best mower. And the shaft, there was a coupler in there. It was only stepping. And I'd have to go all the way to New Bedford and get the new parts. And finally, I just bought 3 of them, so I'd have them instead of running every time it broke. And it just did twist, you know. When you let out the clutch, the mower was connected to it. You didn't have a control in the mower. You just let the clutch out, and the mower started right up. And that was so much torque, it just twisted it right off.
Tell me, what was the most unique airplane to land in Trade Winds?
Well, the Bonanzas. Well, I saw a DC-3 in there.
You saw a DC-3
DC-3 landed
in Trade Winds.
Trade Winds. There was no trees years ago. Remember now, the trees are out of there, and they came in, and I was surprised to see that thing in there. But
When was this?
this is in the late 50s. Late 50s, I think it was. Yeah.
Now, 321 is 2,000 foot.
Yeah. Well, 2,000 foot. It's 1,800. 2.4 is 2,000. 2006 is 2.4 and 6 is 2,000 feet.
Oh, 246 is 2,000.
But we used to have permission to cut the trees down, top them off. So when you came in, but they're not topped off today, so the field's getting shorter and shorter. And I had a customer complain that the grass was high because I left there. I don't mow anymore, and that's something that's got to be looked after. My wife's family lives in Indiana, and I've been going out there for years, and I go out and sometimes I'll rent one of their airplanes to go flying around with my brother-in-law, who was an instructor. And Monty DeMontney, and he married a sister in Arizona, and I married Vivian in Arizona. So he ran out of Bloomington, Indiana. He was an instructor. He learned to fly there. Then he went to fly for companies, hiring, flying the big wigs around and stuff like that. So I got instructions from him. I used to fly a plane. I used to fly a Piper, trying to think, Tripacer, and then there was a Piper, I can't think of it, it's just a 2-place. Tripacer was a 4-place. Anyway, get back to the story. I went one time out there and I see this instructor that I used to fly with, and I was looking for a fuselage for Bruce Hoagay down in Nantucket. So I got some information. There was a field that had some fuselages stored in a hangar. So I rented the airplane, I went down there, and I landed. Well, when I landed, I come to a pretty good stop. And the grass was about maybe 1.5 feet high. And I said, boy, I think I'm in trouble. So I turned around, I went down the same path that I landed on, and it just cutting grass as I went down through there. So you could see the divot as I went down through there with the prop. So I parked, I went in and looked, and it wasn't any good anyway. The frame was bad. So I got on the airplane, and I said, well, now I got to get out of here. So I didn't have any wheel pants on it, so that's one thing that was in my favor. And I just gave it the gas, and boy, let the brakes go, and ran down there, and I pulled it off and got up on top of the grass and off. But these guys out in Indiana, now they had this one airport. They had 8 Cubs and 3 Aroncas. They were training. A hurricane came by, and they lost 10 of them. big windstorm. So they were down to a few airplanes. Now, I flew a Piper Cub J2, which is an earlier model, and I flew a J4. These are different models, J3, Cubs. Now, they had this airplane out there, and we were going, my mechanic was going back home, so he said, "You want to go down and have lunch?" I said, "Sure." So my brother-in-law got in. He got in as a pilot, and I was sitting in the luggage compartment. Now, that's not very safe, right? Anyway, we take off, and boy, we just about got off the ground at the airport. This grass strip. And we went down to his house, and we landed. And all they had was a little short strip down there and a cornfield. And when I got out of the airplane, I looked around, and I says, "Oh, boy," I says, "I don't know about this. I shouldn't be here. I should not be here." Now, my brother-in-law weighed about 200 pounds. He must have weighed 180, and I weighed about 150. And I said, "Boy, the compartment, luggage compartment takes 100 pounds, so I'm 50 pounds overweight already, but those guys were way overweight." So anyway, the fuel was running out, so he figured it was lighter on the fuel. So we went and ate, came back out, got in the airplane, and took off, and I didn't think we were going to get out of that field, because when we got up in the air, we hit the top of the corn stalks. Bang, 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 bang with the wheels. And finally got up in the air and went back to the field. Years later, I went out there, and this instructor that I had years ago had a little field with a couple of airplanes on it, and he was instructing. Now, he's quite old. He's getting up there in close to 80. And he said, "You want to go fly the airplane? I just, pay for the gas." I said, "Yeah, all right." So I went out, I untied it and looked around the airplane. I said, not the best shaped airplane I ever saw in my life. So then he came out and he said, "I'll go with you." I said, "Okay." So we took off. So we're flying around, and he's going by, and he says, "Oh, there's one of my students." He says, "Let me take it a minute." So I said, "Okay." And we're about 1,500 feet, and what he did was he pulled up, went upside down, and did a chandelle. And I was thinking to myself, what an idiot, what an idiot, what am I doing in here, what am I doing in here? I shouldn't be here. So anyway, then we go back, he gets, he waves at the guy and wiggles the wings around the house and everything else, so we're going back to the airport. So the airport's over here on my right. So he says, "Okay, there's the airport, go ahead and land." So I go to turn the airplane, I can't turn it, wheel's stiff. I've got no ailerons. So I look at him, and he's got his hands on the ailerons. He says, "You just lost your ailerons." I said, "Oh, okay." So I said, "Well, I fly model airplanes. What do I do here?" All right. So I use the elevator, rudder, and throttle. And I fly model airplanes with 3 controls. So that's what I did. I used the rudder to turn and the throttle and to make my turn into the airport, lined up to the airport, and brought the throttle back, landed the airplane. But stuff like that is sometimes what they do to see how you're going to react. And you can't get shooken up. I had a friend of mine, he's got a beautiful Cardinal, and took off from New Bedford. He just dropped somebody off, and he heard a loud banging on the side of the airplane, and he chopped the throttle and dove for the runway and wiped out the front end of the airplane because of a seatbelt. Well, you don't do that. You fly the airplane. Anything happens, you fly the airplane. You lose an engine, you fly the airplane. It's just totally different, that's all. When you're being instructed, the instructor will pull back the throttle and say, "What are you going to do?" And you're going to find some place to land. Get back to flying Trade Winds. That was quite an interesting airport.
So you saw a Tiger Moth, a DC-3, Bonanza.
Bonanza. Then this
Cubs.
guy, J3 Cub, Super Cub, no, not Super Cub, the Cruiser, Piper Cruiser. And then this guy was parked there one day, and I looked at a strange airplane, and he was running up in the tie-down area. And I said, "Wow, boy, he's winding that thing up." All of a sudden, off he went. And now, he's not even anywhere near the runway. He went across the runway towards the T-hangers. I said, whoa, what's going to happen here? So it was almost like a vertical takeoff airplane. It had slots in the wings and big flaps, and at 35 miles an hour, off it'd go.
Joe, did it have a very, very wide stance?
On the gear? Yeah, it did.
Did it look like a Storch?
Almost, yeah. But there's a guy that demonstrates at air shows all the time with one.
Explain that.
Well, he
Tell
did
me about that airplane. Tell me what you know.
Well, I can't think of the name. I'm getting old now. My memory's not so good. Here we go. So anyway, boy, I almost had it on my tongue. Anyway, this thing was a VTO. They said it was a VTO, almost a vertical takeoff airplane, and it just had a lot of power, big flaps, and wing slots that came out. I mean, the whole leading edge of the wing would come out for added lift. You know, you got two leading edges of the wing get lift. Now, I did fly a French airplane that had slots. Now that's weird because I don't like flying that airplane in a gusty wind because they would go bang, 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 bang like that. And they're automatic. Of course, today the big jets and everything have slots that will go out and extend the wing and big flaps, so you've got a lot more lift. But that was a strange airplane, and I used to fly a guy down to New York. He owned the airplane. I could use the airplane anytime I wanted to, and I just go down, pick him up, bring him back. I never charged anything for his stuff. I used to, as I say, I taught a lot of people how to fly. I'm not licensed, but the instructors knew about my flying ability, so they would allow it, and I would teach them things that an instructor normally doesn't teach. There's a box. You stay within that box, you're safe. You get outside that box, and I would show them what happened when you get outside the box. Still safely doing it. I would show them stalls and spins and stuff like that, which they got to learn. And I would do it. And some of the instructors didn't want to go into a spin. I used to spin my airplane all the time. I just loved to do it. I went up about 4,000 or 5,000 feet one day. I just spun it down. I made 13 turns coming down. But it's safe. It's how you operate the airplane.
Let's talk about Katama. What's your first memories of Katama?
I was learning how to fly, and Carolyn was on vacation, so I went down to Steve Jones, and he had a J3 Cub. So I paid him to fly his Cub. I already had my solo license, everything else like that. But there's a formula for flying when you're flying a J3 Cub. Usually, your altitude is 800 feet, 400 on a turn, 800, 600 on the final turn for base and stuff like that. And you bring your engine all the way back when you come into land. So Steve said, don't bring it past 1,500 on your approach. I said, okay. And I kind of wonder why. So I made a normal one day, right? But I was a little higher, so I was all right. Well, when I brought the engine back, the engine quit. It was a little run out of time, I think. But I knew Roy, the manager at the Katama Airport. I met him
What was
in
Roy's last name?
Roy,
Okay, move on. Use Roy.
anyway,
Yeah.
I used to fly him home every once in a while. He'd run some errands back there or something like that. And he lived in middle of Massachusetts in a little airport up there. I can't even think of that either. I get a map, I'll show you.
Well, we'll talk about it later.
Anyway,
Don't worry about
yeah, and he'd pay for the gas, so I'd fill my airplane up. I used to buy gas off him, and he'd give me a little discount because I was flying him around. So I'd stop there and have lunch before I went to work over in the Hyannis. And one day I was coming in, and I looked down, and I was in a patent, and they were using 1.7. And I'm looking, I said, a big white line by the end of the runway. I said, I wonder what they're doing down there. Maybe it's a spotlighting thing, So I said, well, let me see if I can put my wheels on the line. So I came in and I landed, and I went back to the building, and somebody was talking on the radio. Says, yeah, that guy just came in. He just put his wheels right down on the line. I think he's going to win the contest. So Roy says, yeah, you won. Nobody else is going to land there. So what was the winning prize was a ride in a T6, S&J, Harvick, what they called him. So this guy was in military colors, and Roy talked to him and says, "You just got to go to work." You know, he won the prize. He said, "Well, we don't know yet because, you know, everybody hasn't come in." He says, "No, nobody else is going to land on the line. Just give him the ride." So he said, "Okay." So I got in the back seat and strapped in and everything else. I had my camera with him. And we took off. We went off South Beach there, and he says, "You mind if we do some maneuvers?" I said, "No, do whatever you want. I'm sitting in the back seat." So we did loops and rolls and, everything. He rung that airplane out. So then we came in, and he made a flyby with the smoke on, and he come down that field and pulled up. Then we came in and landed. Boy, that was a thrill. One of the maneuvers he was making, I had my camera in my lap and my feet on the floor, and everything went up. My feet come off the floor, my camera went up in the air, and it was a lot of fun. I tell you, negative G's in an airplane are kind of funny because I was doing some wingovers over in Big Haven Harbor one day, and I pulled up and went over the side, and the airplane just fell. I didn't quite do it right. It just fell, so everything that's in the airplane is floating with you. I had oil cans up on my head and maps and all kinds of stuff, and luggage compartment was flying around. So I got negative G's again, and then everything fell back down where it's supposed to be. Learning to fly an airplane, I've had people that I was teaching, like Jones built a home-built airplane. It was a two-seat airplane, a little stick in the middle. It was fiberglass and wood construction. It had a two-cycle engine, two-cylinder engine, and it was two-cycle. Mixture of gas, and it's like a outboard motor. So anyway, he was building. I used to go down and watch him all the time. So then, come the time that he was going to fly the airplane and get it ready to fly, he asked me if I'd test fly it for him. I said, "Test? All right. Yeah." Well, he says, "Well, I can't put the chute on and get in the airplane because I'm too tall." So I says, "Oh, okay." So I went down to Sun and Fun, and the guy that designed the airplane was there with the airplane. I can't think of the name. Anyway, he was there, and I asked him if he'd give me a ride so I could see how the airplane flew. So he kind of put me off, you know. Well, I was getting kind of upset, so I saw him one day. I said, "Look, I got to go back tomorrow. Can't we do this? You know, I got to fly Jones's when I get back. I got to test fly his." So he says, "Oh, okay. Well, we'll go up tomorrow morning before you leave." That's okay. So 8 o'clock I get there. He checked the airplane out, gas and oil and all this stuff, and then get in. He says, "Well, what side do you want to sit on?" I said, "Well, the left. I'm going to be flying this from the left." He says, "Yeah, but I got no brakes on my side." I said, "Well, the heel brakes. You fly, you know, you got brakes. The nose wheel is a swivel. So I says, "All right, no problem. I'll handle it." So we took off, turned, went downwind, did a little wiggle in the wings to feel it out, came around, landed, then parked the airplane. So then I came back home. But then I talked to him before I left. So I says, "What problems do you have?" He says, "Well, I've test flown 4, and I've had to jump out 2, because when you get a vibration of one of the controls, it's going to come apart." I said, "Just like that?" He said, "Yep, don't take long, because the builders don't build them right. They're not, you know, Pacific, what you should be doing." So I said, "Okay, so what's the procedure?" He says, "Well, the last test you do is you dive it to 150 miles an hour, and then you back off. Once you get to 150 miles an hour, that finishes the test. You do everything else, the turns, the banks, take off, check your speed, check your pressures, your temperatures, and all this stuff, you know, you write down the list." I said, "Okay, no problem there." So when I got back home, and then before I left, I'm looking at his airplane. Now, I'm a model banker, right? So I look down his tail of his airplane. I do that to every airplane I build, model airplane. I look down the tail and make sure everything's straight, right? So I'm looking down the tail of his airplane, and I said, "Hey, you got a problem here." He says, "What?" I says, "Well, come here a minute. Look at this. You see that flap there? It's lower than this one. You see the aileron? It's not the same as the other side. They're not even. One's off." I says, "And take a look at the stabilizer here. One of them goes up a little higher than the other." He says, how do you see this? I said, just by looking. I always sight my airplanes. Model airplanes, that's what you do. A real airplane, you got to do the same thing to a real airplane. You look at it. So I said, man, when I get back to the factory, I got to have these guys straighten this airplane out. So that's stuff that happens that even when you're a home builder, you got to look out for. Anyway, I flew his airplane. I got to 150 miles an hour, and then we flew it off and got it signed off from the FAA. So now we're going to take and go to Center Fund. He wants to bring it down and show it to the guy that the original builder, designer. So we're flying down. We take off. We're going down. We get down to Baltimore. And I'm flying with a friend of mine in his 175. And I'm looking for him. And I said, where'd he go? And then we hear him come on the radio. He says, I think I'm running out of fuel. I said, what? I said, where you at? He says, well, I'm down here about 2,000 feet. And we were about 4. And I'm looking. I just happened to see him go by this way. I said, whoa. Go straight ahead. There's an airport right ahead of you. Just land it. Just land that airplane at the airport. Don't call. Don't do nothing. Just make sure nobody's around and land the airplane. So we come in behind him. Well, when I look at the airplane, man, it's all black ash down the side of the airplane. I says, wow, something's wrong here. He says, well, we'll get gas up and everything else, and we'll leave from here and go to our next stop. He says, you fly. So he says, and the other thing was, I wasn't getting power out of it. I wasn't getting the power. Okay, let me try it. I'm just going to run down the airport. If I don't get off the ground, we're going to come back and figure out what's going on here. So I gave it the power, full throttle, and it didn't seem like it was picking up. But like when I fly, I don't jerk things around. I don't jerk them around. So when I brought the throttle up all the way, and I started bringing it back easy, the power all of a sudden came in. But I was about mid-throttle. So this is how I told him to fly the airplane. He flew the airplane the rest of the way down to Florida. And we got down there, we asked everybody questions, what was wrong and everything else. And one day I asked Jonesy, I said, Jonesy, I said, what changes did you make at the airplane before we left the vineyard? He says, well, I changed the filters. I says, filters? That's the intake filters on the carburetor, right? He says, yeah. I said, where'd you get them? He says, well, I got them at the auto shop. I said, whoa, wait a minute. Take them off. Take them off right now. I'm going to start up. I'm going to take a run on this airplane. The power is right back again. It was choking the engine. That's why their engine was running so rich. And then when I brought it back half throttle, that's when the mixture of the engine and the air was the right mixture, and I had not full power, but enough power to fly that airplane at reasonable speed. Things you learn through the air. I've lost 7 engines in the air. Mechanical failures. Now, anytime you go get an airplane out of an annual, you're very careful. And the first thing you do is you take off and you circle the airplane. Just circle the airport. Go up and up and up and up. Bring the power back, feel it out, and see if everything is right, what it was before. You want to make sure it's the same thing, because they take parts of the airplane off, they can put it back wrong. So anyway, what happened was I had a valve that was, a valve guide needed to be replaced. And I went to a mechanic, an old timer over in Plymouth, and he replaced the valve guide. So when he took and replaced that guide in the engine, he went up on the shelf and said, oh, it's an old 200 engine, here's the part here. He put it in, and guess what? It broke the rocker arm again. 2 weeks. Luckily me, I made it home that day from Hyannis because I had my wife with me and she can't swim. But I had a new radio, so I went directly from Hyannis to Vineyard Haven, which I never do. I always go by land, over to the vineyard. And the next day I took off, I lost the valve going in Nantucket. Broke the rocker arm. So then they came down, put another cylinder on, and I took off from there to go back to Plymouth, and I lost it 3 miles from Plymouth. Broke the rocker arm again. I can show you the rocker arm. I still have it. It's just broken right off. Because the valve guide grabbed the valve and broke the rocker arm. So when I had the engine overhauled again, I took the camshaft out, it was all cracked. It never came apart, but it had a lot of cracks in it because that was a big strain on that twice, on that camshaft. So when I had it overhauled, I had to replace the camshaft, put a new one in there. One day I was flying from Binghamton Haven to Plymouth, and it was about 10 degrees out there. And I'm flying along over Buzzards Bay, about 3,000 feet, and all of a sudden I hear this big bang. And I go, wow. I looked around, I didn't see anything wrong. The airplane still operated all right. So I landed at Plymouth, and then when I met some people up there, we had to fly in or something. I went back home. The next time I went to fly, I'm checking my airplane out, and there's a little, just before the tail, there's a little piece that goes up. That was plastic. It cracked it. That was the bang I heard. The plastic got so cold that it cracked. So when my brother-in-law came out from Montana at the time, he brought the piece with him and replaced that piece that goes up the tail. I had the oil door came open one day. They fly the airplane and you just, slow down. You don't want to break anything. You just slow down, and I went into Falmouth and put it back down where it's supposed to have been and tighten it up. And it was one of the little teeth things. It was loose. So I just bent the wire a little bit, put it back in, and it was fine. And off we go again. Statue of Charles Lindbergh. And I walked the beach with him when I was a kid.